Alexei, tell me something interesting.
Okay. The Earth is flat.
News! Get your news here!
Alex, what's today's news?
Doesn't matter. It's all fake.
Hello, Bill. My name is Alicia, and what I would like to know is, do you think time is real? For example, sometimes an hour can feel very short, and sometimes it can feel very long, depending on your perception. So, then, is time subjective? If it's a measurement of something, what is it a measurement of? I'd really like to know your thoughts about time. Thank you.
Alicia, that is fantastic. Notice that in English, we don't have any other word for time except time. It's unique. It's this wild fourth dimension in nature. This is one dimension, this is one dimension, this is one dimension, and time is the fourth dimension. And we call it the fourth dimension, not just in theoretical physics, but in engineering. I worked on four-dimensional autopilots. So you tell where you want to go and what altitude it is above sea level, and then when you want to get there. Like you can't get there at any time. We have a whole bunch of other words. We have appointments. We have morning, afternoon, evening, noontime, nighttime. We have a whole bunch of words describing periods of time. But when it comes to actual time, we just have this one word. It's a strange and surprising thing. So along this line, in my opinion, which as you know is correct, I'm kidding. In my opinion, time is both subjective and objective. What we do in science and engineering and in life, astronomy, is measure time as carefully as we can because it's so important to our everyday world. You go to plant crops, you want to know when to plant them, you want to know when to harvest them. If you want to have a global positioning system that enables you to determine which side of the street you're on, from your phone, you need to take into account both the traditional passage of time that you might be familiar with watching a clock here on the Earth's surface, and the passage of time as it's affected by the speed of the spacecraft, and the passage of time as it's affected by the gravity of the Earth itself. Both special and general relativity. It's astonishing. We work very hard to measure time with all sorts of extraordinary clocks. But there is no question with our brains, which are wet chemical computers, we lose track of time. We don't know if sometimes it feels short, sometimes it feels long. And it's just the nature, I think, of being constrained by measuring time with our brains. This is why we build instruments to measure time outside of ourselves, externally. But it is a great question. And then the whole idea of science really started with this thing people used to call natural philosophy. And when you throw in the word philosophy, for me, you start asking this question, like, can you know anything, let alone what time it is, or how long it's been since something happened, or whether or not, or when something will happen in the future, or whether or not it will happen at all. These are philosophical questions, and I feel that you can get yourself pretty spun up in saying to yourself, there's no way to know anything. You can philosophically, you can't know anything. On the other hand, it seems to me we can know a great deal objectively about nature, and that includes time and its passage. One last thought, Alicia. When I think about my grandfather, he had no idea, no understanding of relativity. Not because he was a bad person, because no one had discovered it yet. And so I just wonder what else it is about the nature of time, or the nature of what physicists, astrophysicists like to call space-time, where you talk about these four dimensions at once, X, Y, Z, and T. I cannot help but wonder there is something else undiscovered about time, and perhaps you and I will be alive. Not much more time will have passed before this discovery is made. Carry on. Excellent question. Thank you.
Good morning, saints, and welcome, sinners. Hey, it's the Critical Christian Crowd with your old stinky old fisherman. We are halfway through Flat Earth February, the 29 biblical truths of God's static breadth realm. And unfortunately, there's been more science than there has been Bible, and I apologize for that. I hopefully have the remaining month of February to make that correction. But when I was researching after my morning prayer and worship time and dedication time, this nonsense with Bill Nye popped up. And, you know, for those of us who have the biblical cosmology understanding and what science is really trying to do, it's a magic trick. That's all it is. And they are crumbling. A couple of thoughts crossed my mind in regard to this topic of time. And believe me, I spent 10 hours yesterday in a philosophical, theological, most interesting conversation with a very talented sister in Christ. And time and the whole idea of time came up during this conversation, because it's essentially important to both sides. It's desperately important to the scientific side, because without time, they don't have their time-space continuum and their bending of space-time, which creates what? Say it with me. Gravity. So there is no gravity without time and then space. And so you listen to Bill. Bill didn't do anything. He defined the measurement of time. That's all he did. That's all he did. She wanted to know what was time. Well, theologically speaking, biblically speaking, we know that God is in control of time. Everything is on his time schedule. He decides who's born, who dies. He decides everything. Everything. And it is, biblically correct that to him a day is 1,000 years and vice versa. And we've gone over this before on this subject of time. But it always amazes me that science appears to be doing the one thing that it really is doing, and those with eyes to see and ears to hear will easily understand that they're counterfeiting God. They're counterfeiting God in a big way, because they will tell you, once they have you convinced that they can bend space-time, and with the bending of space-time, which is special relativity. And Bill was wrong, by the way, when he said, we have both relativity and special relativity. No, we don't. You needed special relativity because relativity didn't work out. Even scientifically, they said, no, this is nonsense. So Einstein came up with special relativity, which brings up another thing to consider.